So the first question that's general and applicable to everyone is, Linda Saylor asks, who are the injured persons? Does that include every person who could have been a descendant of slavery? And then the more specific question from Malika Shirk is to Javon's presentation, and it's related. Are you suggesting that Jamaicans should receive reparations from the United States, even though the United States did not enslave them? Who are the injured persons? And does that include every person who could have been a descendant of slavery?
Reparations and repair are for the impossibility of Black freedom that we can trace back to the period when slavery was legal and practiced more widely than it is now, and where all Black people were always already enslavable in ways that white people never were. And so I feel broadly that, I feel myself that reparations should be available for Black people, not just the descendants of enslaved people. Never mind the practical problems of limiting reparations only to those who can prove a DNA-related connection to someone who was enslaved, because those records don't exist. So we're Javon's talks a lot about loopholes. I think leaning on science to resolve what are the harder moral questions also leaves too much money on the table and exonerates too many people. And so it's impractical to do, but I also think it's not the right way to approach the problem to rely on DNA to define the scope of those who were deserving, those who were entitled of some kind of repair.
Thank you, Catherine. Michael?
Yeah, I also agree with the sentiment of my fellow panelists, and I think it's not about the DNA in the strictest sense, because it's about legalizing slavery and about what that meant for even, say, free Black people like Solomon Northup, who was kidnapped and sold into slavery, or could have been kidnapped and sold into slavery, or for all the injuries stemming from enslavement that reverberated throughout, sort of predatory landing, Jim Crow, legalized segregation, all these various things that all Black people have to contend with, no matter how they identify, or even all people suspected of being Black, they're viewed as Black, etc. So I think ultimately when we talk about injury, that's what we're talking about. So therefore, it's about much more than tracing your descent. I also think that in terms of the flip side of the question of who is the injured party, who are the victims, is like who must pay for this and who's accountable. And I was thinking, like, as my other panelists were talking, what if there was like a financial version of 23andMe where every white family had to submit their tax records over the generations, and someone could figure out if they were tied and bound up with slavery somehow. And what we'd find probably is that so many people are connected to the history of slavery who don't think of themselves or their ancestors as having been slaveholders or something, And I think that in the same way that the overwhelming majority of white people in this country have benefited from slavery, the overwhelming majority of Black people in this country have suffered somehow and been injured by enslavement and its legacy. And so for that reason, I think, we can dig into this question and sort of establish who owes what to whom, but it will be something more broad than something strictly in terms of DNA. It's more about the sort of political category of whiteness, the political category of Blackness, and what that has meant for the people who are sort of routinely sort of conscripted to those roles, or sort of like recruited to those roles or something like that. So ultimately, those are the people who benefit and the people who are injured, and therefore that's sort of how we must adjudicate those debts.